cybersecurity or the importance of a specific particular area, and you had to convince them. What are some of the ways that you found best in managing up?
One, as I've mentioned, telling stories. So then that story could be a personal experience or an experience that I have seen another company go through that will help create just this environment of it's happened before, right? And here's how it happened and why and what we could do to safeguard against that. And so I think especially our board and senior leadership team, and I would say everybody, right? It's how well you tell the story. It's like going back to like when we were kids and getting tucked in, right? Like storytelling.
Right.
At the basic core, people want to just kind of understand where we're coming from in order to buy in and support. But the one thing that the marketplace is also talking about in the security industry is identifying a framework and then mapping your program against it. And so I have implemented a new language for our CHS security program, and that is aligning to the NIST cybersecurity framework. And we did an internal assessment of where we believe we're ranked from a maturity standpoint. And obviously that can be very detailed controls. But when you start to bubble it up into categories and kind of theme areas, it actually generated a great conversation across our board and senior leadership team, because we were using something that was kind of proven from the industry. We needed to align to something, but then just even the 5 categories from identify to recover, like they just kind of make sense, right? And at least I guess they do to me. And so I feel like that was a very effective way to talk about sometimes very detailed and very hard to understand security controls. But we kind of zeroed in on areas where we felt like we were really lacking, areas that were behind, and talked about those particular topic areas to, provide some light in terms of where we were applying them or not across scope, service, and capability. And then we also covered our wins, like our top categories where we felt like we had made a ton of gains in the last couple years, and where we felt like we were very effective from a program standpoint. And I think, again, I feel like it went over well in terms of just understanding. But the beauty of that now is that I've got a language that we are now continuing to speak in, as well as share even just more detailed stories behind where we need investments and where we need to focus our people.
Sure. And
know that we've got that leadership team at least understanding now kind of the mechanics of that language.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up nomenclature, because I've found that when you are driving change within an organization, a lot of people don't pay attention to it as much as they should, but I think getting an alignment around the nomenclature of what the change is, what the change means across the organization, and in running a campaign, as if you will, about it is super important. I recently spoke to a senior director of marketing over at Blue Cross. I recently spoke to a director at Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they always in the marketing team have a marketing plan for the marketing plan, which is a way to socialize it internally, and I think that's super important. So, but with what you're talking about, Sarah, being able to have that conversation, but I can imagine in your position, it's really easy to sound like one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right?
Yes.
You could easily come in and use a lot of fear tactics and things to get the point across. I think that would be the easy way to get it done. But I feel like when people are hearing those sorts of things, they shut down, because as I mentioned before, when I was a project manager, it was very easy for me to threaten budget or timeline implications to changes and things. And I found over time that it didn't work. It didn't have the effect that I would have hoped it did. Was there any time, can you tell me about a time when you realized that sort of approach wasn't going to work for you?
Yeah, pretty much day one here. And so that was one thing that I had the privilege of obviously working under some new leadership after the breach at Target, and they had very great approaches to security awareness, as well as obtaining buy-in from leadership. And it all stemmed from how good is the story and my compelling vision, as well as, the why do we need to do what we need to do. And so I learned a lot. And when I came to CHS, I chose to subscribe to the anti-FUD methodology, which is like, I will never go to the kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt space of security. But it is very important for people to know that this type of, whatever type of scenario or, threat and malware of the day, ransomware being one, to know kind of what it is, how it works, whether we have been impacted by it before, and then who is being impacted by it. And then what are we doing about it, or how do we safeguard against this? And what's our philosophy, if it does happen to us? And so just telling it in that way, I just feel like people are like, okay, I kind of understand sort of the life cycle, the motivations, where this is impacting others, and or our company, and they can kind of rally behind that.
I love what you said earlier, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about this. But you mentioned the why versus the how, and I truly believe in security, the why is by a factor more important than the how. Would you agree?
Yes, for sure. Because I would tell you too, especially from a productivity standpoint, as I mentioned before, turning on mobile application management and changing the way that people access CHS information resources from their mobile phone, we could check or uncheck a box that would make people far less productive when we've really never had an issue around that checkbox. Like that has never proven to be a risk or a data loss mechanism or a threat to CHS. So why should we check the box? And consider, again, taking that step versus the leap, and getting our people more comfortable with just, kind of the initial adoption.
How would you coach them around being able to see that not everything is a nail? What would be that first initial step? Obviously, like you had mentioned, going and talking and listening with other people. But what are some of the other first things that you might suggest for somebody that's new to that type of role?
Yeah, it's a great topic, because I actually have a newer manager on the information security office team, and there are those days where yes, all you see are nails, and a lot of them. We are working on a risk scoring methodology. I also have an organization, a committee really that I chair, that has cross-business unit representation, as well as our partners in compliance and legal. And if it feels like a big enough nail, and we've done our job to sort of assess what could go wrong with this issue, and we consider this to be a high priority issue, and we don't necessarily have this on our project plan or roadmap, we bring it to that committee and get consensus on whether we all collectively feel that that's something that should be prioritized, maybe above some other things. And for the most part, I leverage our security leadership team to have some of those pre-conversations as well. And we've got a great manager on Zach's team who helps keep us honest on some of the technology projects that we have on our list, to ensure we're not, over tapping the team. Because one thing is that we've got an awesome team, and we've got to keep them happy and healthy. And us running around with our heads swiveling about isn't going to help anybody. And so we try to take a very just realistic approach on, all right, we have these projects on the docket that are very high, very important. And then we've got maybe some other things that could be deprioritized or put on hold if we find a big enough issue to try to tackle. But we try to foster kind of collective input and collaboration across my team, Zach's team, from a security standpoint, and have everybody at least sort of give voice to the why is this more important than other things that we have on our list.
How do you manage those personally, where you have to make a decision on something that has never been a problem before? How do you balance that decision and work through that problem?
And so for that risk committee that I had mentioned, I've got a template that I kind of work through that gives some background and context around a particular issue. And then I come to that group with options as well as my recommendation. And so even just going through the process of kind of completing that presentation for the risk committee allows me to keep myself honest on the why is this important, the what could go wrong, have we experienced threats to our organization around this particular topic area. And I feel like by the time I walk the risk committee through that, everybody's pretty much kind of aligned, just because it's a nice, well-rounded, presentation around a particular topic. And I feel like that's been just an effective tool for me to use just to even go through my own thought process around a particular issue topic.
You mentioned malware and ransomware and some of these other things. What do you feel like are some of the most important things for a business, either maybe not necessarily the size of CHS, but other organizations that are handling security? What do you think are some of the more important things now and in the near future that people need to be paying attention to?
Email. If organizations do not have email issues, then they're either not aware of them, which is scary, or they might be a little bit kind of wool over the eyes. But I imagine that you've been on the receiving end of somebody's email account getting compromised, either through malware or through credential theft. And especially it seems like educational organizations, like we get a ton of .edu. And we now have a very great partner in that process to help filter inbound email as well as outbound and monitor anything that we see going on from our networked employees. But email, I would say, is just it's like the war zone.
Yeah.
And it's very easy for the bad actors to spin up email accounts, and it's kind of whack-a-mole in terms of trying to block them. But just rallying your employees around spotting an illegitimate email, knowing where to report it, having that process somewhat automated or just easy to use for them is very critical. And I've spent quite a bit of time just even monitoring what our employees are reporting. And I have to say, I'm really proud of the gains that we've made in our employees spotting or recognizing malicious email.
Email is, it's a silent killer. It seems innocuous because it's been around as the communication device for so long. But that seems to be one of the biggest things. So with that, if I'm a small business owner, let's say I've got, a dozen employees or so, how would you coach them around putting in those processes in place? Obviously, in a small business, they've got a lot of moving parts. They don't have the levels of management that a company, maybe CHS, has. But what are some of the initial steps that you might suggest for somebody?
Yeah, and so it's interesting because those smaller business units businesses might be using something like Gmail, right? Versus Microsoft Exchange services, and so not getting into the technical weeds, I would again ensure that they have a place or a mechanism to report suspicious email or report malicious email, and that might be abuse at pick your flavor of whatever email hosting provider they have. I think having a personal Gmail account, Gmail is actually doing a pretty good job of blocking and tackling some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But two, just even, I'm sure, and I haven't recently researched different examples on